For the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, "Awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light." Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14.
Welcome back to Life with Liz and B Season 2, Episode 2. And I don't know if you can see my beautiful friend Rissa over there, but I already know what you're thinking. Where's Hunter? Why are we getting Sammy for 2 weeks in a row? And let me just tell you, don't worry, Hunter's beautiful face and voice is going to be back very soon. He is in the works of having some conversations with some men that are actually going to be coming and sharing their powerful healings and transformations on the podcast. And so you get me for another week because Rissa is a personal friend of mine that I'm so excited to be interviewing tonight. But before we get started in Rissa's interview, I just want to give a quick opener and disclaimer for everybody that we're going to be sharing at the beginning of every podcast, because we believe as believers in Jesus that God can use all forms that he chooses to heal people. So this includes the power of a biopsychosocial spiritual model. And so what this means is that God can use spiritual disciplines to heal somebody, which is through prayer, solitude, fasting, or God can use medications and personal counseling and coaching to help someone walk out their healing. And so wherever you're listening to this from, or wherever you're at in your personal journey of healing, we want you to know that God can use whatever tool, whatever resource in front of you to help you walk out your healing. And so you're going to get to hear Rissa's personal journey and testimony tonight of how she walked out her healing. And now that Hunter and I are in a season where I have stepped into biblical life coaching, Hunter's going to be following suit, doing the same very soon. We want to see people saved, healed, delivered through any way that God personally leads them to. And so we just want you to know that Jesus loves you. He gave his son to heal your mind, your will, your emotions, your soul. And you're going to hear a powerful testimony tonight of a near and dear friend of mine who has had that kind of transformation in her life and is still on a journey of walking out her healing as we speak. So I want to introduce you to my friend Rissa, who I have known for a few years now. And when I met her on social media, one of the things that I was so blown away by was her infectious joy and her energy, alongside her fearlessness, her boldness to expose the darkness of child sexual abuse. And she did this through sharing her own personal testimony so openly on social media to help other women that were suffering silently, so that they didn't feel so alone. And so Rissa has a powerful testimony of how she is a survivor of child sexual abuse, and she is now happily married to her husband, Austin, of 7 years, and they are currently trying to conceive their first baby, which we know God's timing is perfect in all things. So dive in with us with an open heart and mind as you hear Rissa's transformation, in hopes that it encourages you, or you can share it with somebody that you know. So Rissa, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the YouTube. I'm going to kick it right over to you so that you can go into taking us back to your childhood and really sharing with us, like, what was childhood like for you? What kind of household did you grow up in, as we just kick off talking about your testimony?
Well, hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to share this part of my story and just really hoping and praying that it will even just reach one person and help one person to not feel so alone, because it is something that is so vulnerable and can feel so isolating. So, my childhood, I guess, in a nutshell, complicated, chaotic. There was a lot of, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of happy moments and I have a lot of happy memories. And it was just kind of all over the place. And I guess truly, like, I can't say that we grew up in a Christian household, but God wasn't not present. Me and my sisters, we would go to church, and we started going to church um, when I was in first grade, and we would go to some of the um, Sunday school classes and some of the church classes and everything. And my sisters at some point stopped going to church, and I always loved going to church, and I always just enjoyed being in church. And I know now, especially now looking back, it was such a God thing because there's no way I should have found God and or should have known God, I should say, because God was never lost. Should have known God with everything that was going on at home. And I'm just so grateful for that. So my there was a lot of happy times. There was also a lot of hard, a lot of bad, a lot of drama, lots of chaos, lots of things all over the place. Everything was very money centered. Um, there was a lot of times I were with God, or at least felt like God was in it, and definitely lots of times I were without. So that's kind of my childhood in a complicated, chaotic nutshell.
I love what you said about even though you didn't grow up in a home that had an emphasis on Jesus, and having a relationship with him, he still pursued you. And there were still so many opportunities where you were like, also pursuing God. And there were a few times, that you just had mentioned that like you would go to church and you wanted to be in Sunday school. And I just want to point out that sometimes based on our upbringing or the environment that we're in, where the Lord cannot be in the environment because of the choices that our parents have made, right? If our parents choose not to share the faith with us and we have to hear it from friends or whatever, the Lord still wants to pursue you, and he still does in so many different ways. And I think it's just so beautiful that you can still grow up in a home that really doesn't exemplify the Lord, and God will still at some point in your life, he'll come chasing after you, which is really beautiful. So for you,
Yeah.
how did you start to navigate obviously experiencing child sexual abuse? How old were you? And then when that happened to you, how long did it continue for? What did your journey look like from the moment that that encounter happened to you as a child?
So, it started from when I was around 3 or 4 years old. And it was from the father figure in my life who was my stepdad. And it went on until I left home when I was almost 19. So it lasted for about 16 years. And to be honest, and it's child sexual abuse and trauma in that way, especially when it starts so young, is really complicated for a lot of people to understand in the sense of because a lot of the times you get asked, well, why didn't you ever say anything, right? Well, when it happens at such a young age and it starts at such a young age, you don't know that it's wrong. If you think about, and Sammy, you have you have Lily and you have Leighton, and you think about like Lily at that 2 year old age, and even when she's 3 and 4, their brains, they just know what their life is around them. They don't know that there's supposed to be anything different. They don't know, at that age, they're still developing and they're still trying to figure out life. And so when it starts at such a young age, I really honestly didn't even know that it was wrong until I was probably around 14, 15 years old. And it wasn't until at that point, and the only reason I knew it was wrong at that point was because one, had found out a couple things. One, I had found out that my stepdad wasn't my biological dad, because at that point, that whole time I had thought that he was my biological dad. That's a whole other story. And then I also had a conversation with a friend from school, and she was mentioning something that had happened to her. And I don't remember hers and mine conversation, but she mentioned it to me later. And I only knew, obviously, whatever I told her was enough for her to call Child Protective Services, because the next day or within that week, Child Protective Services showed up at my house. I denied everything at that point because I was so freaked out with everything that was going on. I wasn't ready to say anything. I was scared, I was in ninth grade at that time. Like I was a child. And so I was terrified of what was going to happen. And I knew that, my stepdad was mad at me, and my family would have been mad at me had things gone forward at that point. I have a very people pleaser personality. So, and especially at that time, under being that much control, there wasn't a lot that I really was willing to do, and a lot that I didn't know I could do. And so it went on for 16 years. And, there was one time that I said that I didn't want to do it anymore. And my stepdad, my abuser, he's unfortunately the reason why he's gotten away with so much is because he's a very narcissistic person and very controlling. And he would convince me that, he needed me to continue for ABC reasons. And I would just say, okay, because again, I didn't want him to be upset. I didn't want our relationship or whatever what was going on to affect his happiness towards me, even though I really shouldn't have cared. But again, like he was still my dad. there was still lots of happy moments, but there was so much going on behind closed doors that just no one knew about. And so it was a very once I realized that what was going on was wrong, it put me down a really dark path for several years. Um, Even I would say honestly, up until probably the last couple of years, when I really started to process everything that was going on. And I'm going to be 20, I'm 27 now. So honestly, probably until I was around 23, 24 years old, it was really bad. And I don't think I really realized how bad it was until I started to really deep dive into everything that had happened and started to also remind myself like what went on was wrong. It was not okay in any way, and there's no justification for that for any kind of that behavior in any way, but especially against a child. There's just no justification.
Wow, it's so like when you walk through that whole 16-year journey of putting it into perspective of, as such a young child, like you said, you don't know anything outside of your immediate, really surroundings. You don't have that kind of awareness. And seeing it from your perspective, like I'm trying to see it from your perspective right now, growing up in that kind of atmosphere for that long and not thinking there was anything wrong with it because again you didn't know any better, and it's not like your friends probably in elementary school were talking about sex or talking about things that were related to sex, and so you're not thinking that there's anything wrong with it. You don't, none of them are having those kinds of conversations, and so when it did hit you, right? That like this is wrong and what has happened to me is not okay and something needs to be done. How did things get brought to light? What did that process look like when you're now, a 19-year-old and or even, in your teen years when you do start to realize that it's wrong? What kind of course of action did you take when you then decided that you were going to bring this to light?
So when I was 17, that was the first time that I had really, outside of my friend, and again, when I had told my friend, I didn't expect everything like CPS and everything like that to come about. And I think like I only really told her because she had told me something, and I didn't think that what I was telling her again at that time, I didn't think what I was telling her was wrong. I just realized, oh, this isn't normal. Like it's just different. And so then when CPS showed up at the house, it was like I got scared because I'm like, oh, this is really wrong. So I really didn't process it, I guess, at that point. It was just because it was still going on, so nothing was really changing. So it didn't matter to me, I guess, at that point. When I was 17 is when I finally told my stepmom, which was my stepdad's ex-wife, and her and I were very close. Very complicated blended family situation, but her and I were very close. She knew everything. I told her everything that had happened. She unfortunately didn't do much about it. Um, and she was always financially supported by him as well. So money played a huge factor in, I think, a lot of things. And so she didn't do anything about it. We would have conversations with him about it. She would talk to him about it, but nothing ever came out of that as far as, him being made responsible for what he was doing. When I finally decided to leave home, the whole year of 2015 was, aside with everything else that had been going on, 2015 was probably the worst year of my life. Simply because that year I was 18 and my stepdad was at that point intending on and trying to get me pregnant. And by God's grace, I never got pregnant. There was a lot that happened in between that I'm still like I'm honestly still working through all of that, especially because of where things are at right now. But by God's grace, I never got pregnant during that time. However, I was going through certain fertility treatments. I was doing at 18, like, which is just, it's mind blowing. And why doctors didn't think to look into anything further, because no 18-year-old should be going through fertility treatments. In any way, it was just a really, really, really dark time for me, especially. And when I finally decided to leave home, I had went to my church that I was going to, which was connected to the school that I had graduated from, because I got switched schools at one point, and so started going to this private Christian school. I went to that church a couple of days prior to me leaving home, and that weekend, my stepdad and my mom were going to be gone in Utah because my mom runs marathons, so they were going to be gone in Utah for that weekend for a marathon. And I was really, really, really scared I was going to get pregnant. And I was just kept praying constantly to like for God to not let me get pregnant because I didn't know how I was going to explain that to my siblings. My stepdad had this whole plan figured out for what he was going to say to people once I was pregnant. But he had this, so it was just a mess, and so I was a mess, and so I couldn't even tell you, Sammy, that whole week before I left home. I tell everyone all the time, I don't even remember because I just feel like it was the Holy Spirit guiding me the whole way. I don't even feel like it was me because if it was by my own strength, there's no way I would have done it. I didn't have a job, I didn't have any money, I didn't have anything other than when I left home, I just had my trash bags full of clothes. I had a couple suitcases, and I went to the church that morning. But it was the Holy Spirit just leading me that whole week because there was a couple of times prior that I was like, I'm gonna leave home, I'm gonna go, I'm just gonna do it. I never did. But for some reason that week, it was just like it's time to go. And it was just the Holy Spirit guiding my every step, my every word, everything. And so I went to the church a couple of days prior. I went and talked to the pastor. Um, and being a mandated reporter, he called the police and they came to our house, but my mom and my stepdad weren't gone, were in Utah already, so they weren't home anymore. I still didn't press charges at that point. I still didn't want to say anything because my sisters and my siblings and my brothers especially, they mean so much to me, and I didn't want to mess up their life in any way or mess up with whatever they had going on at that point. I didn't want the family to be in chaos, and so I just told them, I don't want to press charges. Like, should things come up later, like that's different, but right now this is just where I just need to leave. That's all I know. I just need to leave. Um, and so went to church that morning, and it was October 4th, 2015. Got to church at 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. And yeah, it just from there that I just started to I let my now husband, we had just met or we hadn't just met, but we had just started dating at that point. I told him, to some degree, things that had happened, the reason why I had left, because I ended up having to live with him and his family for a little bit, because I didn't really have anywhere to go. And so lived with him and his family for a bit. And yeah, I just started to slowly just let people like tell people, I guess, for the first time that this is what had been going on. Um, but I was also still in contact with my stepdad. So it was a really confusing, really complicated, very hard to mentally and emotionally leave that relationship in that situation, especially because my brothers were still so young and he was my only real contact to my brothers. And had I severed that relationship with him, I also would have severed a relationship with my brothers at a much younger age, and I was not ready for that. So thankfully, God has done a lot in me and mentally and emotionally and spiritually since then, but it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't a quick decision to just like all of a sudden start sharing or start bringing this to light. It's taken a lot of years and a lot of uncovering and unveiling and recognizing, truly honestly just recognizing that what happened was not okay, because that was really the first step, because I just wasn't ready to accept. I always found a reason to justify, and I think a lot of victims and survivors can like relate to that, is just you do a lot of justification, especially when the person was so close to you or was a father figure or an uncle or a family member or someone that you're supposed to be able to look up to and love truly and wholeheartedly. It's really hard to just sever that relationship, even knowing the bad things that they did.
It's so twisted when you think about it that way. Like, as you're talking about the pressure that you had on you to be so, like, you're being so mindful of, like, well, all of this has happened to me, but also I don't want to lose the relationships with my siblings. And like, there was always something that was like a way for you to continue to hang on to it until there was that moment where it finally was like, okay, I have to bring this fully to light, and now I have to start taking action, and I have to start moving forward so that I can receive full healing from this, and knowing that your stepdad's gonna do right what he chooses to do, whether it's breaking off relationships with you and your siblings. And so talk about that. Did that happen? Like, when things finally were brought to the point where you did start to to be more vocal and want to press charges. What did that process look like when you got to that point when you were like, okay, I'm done with this and like I'm gonna actually do something about it?
Yeah, so I didn't press charges until October of 2018. So that was a little 5.5 years ago now, is when I first pressed charges. And when I pressed charges at that point, I had pressed charges shortly after reconnecting with my mom. That's a whole other situation that I could literally go on for too long to talk about that. But mine and my mom's relationship is extremely delicate and complicated. Um, but I finally had reconnected with my mom and finally told her everything that had happened. And shortly after telling her, I filed the police report against my stepdad. Once I did that, I had already obviously cut off communication with my stepdad, which I really only did like weeks, if not a month, maybe a month max prior to me filing the charges. And I think it was really just me connecting with my mom that kind of gave me the courage to do it because she started out on my side. Um, she didn't stay on my side, and she is currently not on my side and currently does not believe me. Or she does believe me, but she's choosing to stay with him. And unfortunately, it did sever relationships. I haven't talked to or seen, well, I've seen my siblings. I recently just saw them during the trial, during the verdict reading. But they don't believe me. They're extremely upset with me. My brothers, unfortunately made that very clear. Um, and yeah, so I haven't had a real conversation, really any communication with any of my siblings since 2018. I haven't seen my brothers in a positive light since December of 2018, or talked to them really since then as well. Um, they, that's their dad. And unfortunately, it happened to me, but it didn't happen to them. So, and they always saw me as daddy's girl because like I said, there was a lot of happy moments, and the way he had created and cultivated our relationship was so isolating, to where I was so close to him, and he made it to where I was so close to him that I wouldn't know how to be without him. And so because of that, I looked up to him. I mean, he was my idol, he was my everything. I loved him so much. And I don't think that that was completely false. I think that I know that there was actual genuine love from me to him on that way. And I, as a dad and as my father, um, reversal wise, I couldn't tell you, based on what he was doing. I don't think that was actually real love and definitely wasn't fatherly love. Um, but so because of that, I was always praising him. I was always lifting him up. I was always saying how great he was. And that should have been a sign in and of itself, but apparently, I guess it wasn't. And I was so against like my mom, and it was all about him and not about anyone else. And so my siblings saw that. They didn't see everything else that was going on underneath. So then when all of a sudden there's this police report now being filed, they're very confused. And I think that they're also extremely brainwashed. Even though my stepmom knows the truth, she is still telling them that I'm lying. And my brothers only know what they know. They were 9 and 6 when I left, so they were still young. And I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't tell them why I was leaving. I never told my sisters anything. They know I'm not biologically related to my stepdad. Um, but they're just very against me. So that's been extremely challenging to say the least. Um, and at the same time, it's also been so long that I've really been around them that it's hard to, I don't, I guess I feel numb to it in a way, which probably isn't a great thing. But at this point, I feel like that's just God just protecting me right now from having to face anything that I just don't need to at this moment. Really dealing with those emotions and dealing with that situation, it's completely out of my control. There's nothing I can do about it. And that's completely God and his, restoration and reconciliation that only he can really do, because they know where I stand. And should they one day want to have a relationship with me, that's on them. And I have to just have faith and trust that, especially more so with my brothers, that one day that they will see the light. And they will realize like obviously there's been guilty verdicts, so we all can't be lying. Because there's multiple victims, it's not just me. So
Right.
um yeah, so when I filed the police report, that was when I really started, I feel like my healing process, I guess. I definitely started it prior, but at that point was again me realizing that what had happened was wrong. I started therapy, which was extremely helpful and necessary, and I feel like played a huge part into where I'm at right now. Thankfully, I've never had to be on any medication. By God's grace, I haven't been that deep, but I also I God has been so good in my life from such a young age, and I don't have any explanation for that aside from that. Because I should not be who I am today with everything that happened. I could have taken and should have taken a different path, but I just didn't. But God has just done such healing, and He really protected me at such a young age that He put certain things in me that He doesn't allow me to dwell too much on things or to be brought down or broken down by too many things. And I think that's him also like loving me and just having that mercy and grace on me that I was broken down for so long, and I'm not going to stay in that place anymore. I refuse to stay in that place. Granted, I'm going to have my moments and I've got my days and I got my weeks. I've been a past few months, I've been a whirlwind of emotions. Don't get me wrong. Um, but he always brings me through. So I'm just so grateful.
Well, it's so encouraging to hear, like, through your entire abuse journey. Of course, I'm sure you had those moments where you were really angry at God or really confused or really questioning, like, why God are you allowing this to happen? Especially once you became an adult or a teenager to the point where you understood then it was wrong. I'm
Yes.
sure those feelings came about, right? Where you had those moments
Oh yeah.
where you were upset and you were angry. And so, I just wanted to bring forth, like, for any of the listeners that don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, or you're, questioning or you're confused by the greatest question that people ask, right? Like, why would a good God allow so much suffering? And like, if God really loves us and he really cares for us, then why is there pain like the pain that Rissa had to go through? And I'm always just reminded we can take everything back to the beginning, because our God gives us free will. And your abuse was not your fault. It was not your choice. It was not anything that you had control over. Like, you are a straight up victim to the free will sin of your stepdad and of your surroundings and his choices, his life choices, um, and what he chose to do and the free will that God has given us, greatly affected your life. But you have chosen a different path. You have chosen that even through sin and even through the darkness, that is going to happen, because God doesn't force us to love him. He doesn't force us to have a relationship with him. He says, I'm going to let my people be free. And so, because the people can be free, they can do whatever they want. And I'm not going to force them to follow me. I'm not going to force them to believe in me or love me. But the ones that do and decide that they're going to give their life to me, and that they're going to repent, they're going to recognize that he died, he rose, and he is the only way to have eternity, an eternity of freedom, of no pain, of no suffering, of no heartbreak like we experience here on earth. The people that are willing to make that choice are the people that are able to walk in freedom and live in heavenly places, even in such a dark world, that we live in. And so God allows free will because it happened when Adam and Eve made that decision for all of us in the beginning. And since then, it's just been a catapult effect of all of our sin.
Yep.
And I wanted to bring up Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, because this is so encouraging. And I know you've heard this scripture before, Rissa. It says, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. One day, Jesus is going to return. And in that moment, when he returns, we get to have that hope of knowing that earth was such a small, glimpse for what we're going to be able to experience in heaven and in eternity, where there's not going to be any of this pain or this suffering. But while we're
Yeah.
here, while you're here, you have chosen to use what has happened to you, where you could stay a victim for the rest of your life. You could choose to stay in that space and to be angry at God and to blame God and to totally turn away from Him. You've chosen not to do that. And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to share kind of like your feelings with God, even through your healing process of, maybe starting in a place where when you realized you were angry and now you've came through. How has your faith helped you through the past really, decade almost?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And just to touch on, why does God allow evil things to happen? And I just like for the unbeliever, just so you know, God is his character is not evil. He does not allow bad things to happen. That is not his doing because that's not in his character. We serve a good, gracious, merciful God. And this is something I've recently learned because even up until probably a year ago, I was wondering, I'm like, how does this even work? How does this even happen? Because there are so many bad things that happen in the world. And we know that being a Christian, we have that mentality and that realization that nothing happens without God knowing, right? But it doesn't mean it happens because God is doing it. It's his knowledge. Like he knows everything. He is omnipotent, he's omniscient, he knows everything. He is in everything. And when bad things happen, it's not his doing. That's not his character. He's not even capable of doing bad things. It is man and it is Satan that do these bad things because we're human. And God in Genesis 50:20, he says, I will turn and make all things for good. It says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. God says and promises that even when these bad things happen, he is going to bring good out of it. It's not saying that he is going to make these bad things happen. He is saying that when they do, because we are human and our world unfortunately has sin, when they do, I will bring good out of it. And I don't want I in the most humble way possible. I know my life has been such a testimony to that and just even in my circle as far as just knowing that these these bad things can happen. That doesn't mean you have to be that product of that bad thing. And I have full awareness that my life could have gone so differently, but I'm so grateful in God's grace and mercy and his love for me that he didn't allow me to do that because I don't know who I would be without God. I don't know where I would be. But in that, there has definitely been conversations with God where I'm like, why is this happening? Why me? Why is it continuing to happen? Why won't it stop? Knowing that God is in control of everything, like, why won't it just stop? And I went through a lot of anger. I would say anger was probably the very first emotion that I felt because up until around ninth grade, I was just it again, it wasn't anything different. It wasn't anything that I thought was supposed to be wrong or whatever. So in around ninth grade is when I really felt like true anger for God. And that lasted up until probably when I left home. So probably from about 5 years, anger lasted and it lived and it festered and it caused me to have suicidal moments and it caused me to not want to live on this earth because I was just so confused. I was the only Christian or at least, truly Christian person in my family, yet I was the one that I felt like that was suffering the most. And it hurt me. It brought me to my knees constantly. I mean, I have journal entries where I'm constantly praying to God, like just make it stop. Like why won't it stop? And praying and crying in my pillow at night and not, praying that he's just not going to come into my room that night. And just those constant prayers and just not understanding, especially being a child, not understanding why it just won't stop. And when I look back now in retrospect, I can to some degree thank God for not what happened because I don't know that that's something I can thank God for, but I can thank for what he did after. Um because had I not gone through all of that, I wouldn't be who I am today. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that I would be the same, firm in my faith person that I'd be today if I didn't have that in my life. But if I didn't have that in my life, I guarantee you I would not have my husband. I would not be where I'm at today work-wise. I would not be who I am faith-wise. Um, and so I'm thankful that Jesus felt anger and felt emotions too, and that in time I learned that was okay to feel all of those emotions. And also one time I heard that, God has big shoulders and you can lean on those shoulders. And so ever since I heard that, it's just been such a comfort because God has these really big shoulders, bigger than the entire world because he made the world. And we can lean into those shoulders and we're going to be just fine. And so I went through a lot of anger and it took a long time and a lot of years and and I still have anger. I recently just went through a season of just being angry with God because especially once I filed the police report, it was just net ending. I mean, we were getting no results. And it's one reason why a lot of victims unfortunately don't come forward and file police reports is because this process, it is beyond draining and exhausting. There are times I wanted to pull out. I didn't want to do it anymore because it's exhausting. And unfortunately, victims just don't have the rights that they should in these situations. And all of the rights go to the criminals, which makes zero sense to me, but that's I will get on my hot box with that. Um, but it's just such a draining process. And there were so many moments where I was like, okay, God, like I'm done. I don't understand why you won't make this end. So even in that, and finally we have the victory, and now I can look back and say, okay, God, thank you for the timing, because now had I not gone through all of those years of waiting and pressing forward and pressing through, I wouldn't have been able to stand on the stand and, testify like I was able to. So we can always look back in retrospect and thank God for what he did. But of course, in the moment, it's so hard to do that. And that's okay. And it's valid. And you're allowed to feel angry because Jesus literally walked the earth and felt those exact same feelings that you're feeling. So you're perfectly allowed to feel them. I went through some guilt and shame, especially once my husband and I got married, because him and I waited until marriage. And when we got to that point, I remember feeling dirty. And even before we got married, there were times I would feel impure, I would feel unclean because he had waited, fully. He was a virgin and I was not. And, granted, that wasn't my choice at the beginning, but then at some point it was my choice. And I did decide to have sex with a boyfriend that I was dating in high school shortly after my stepdad had taken my virginity because I was in my brain trying to justify what had happened with my stepdad and trying to make it seem like I was somehow taking power and control back. And, so I went through that guilt and that shame of just feeling so dirty. And, my husband was, thank God for him. He was constantly reassuring me, like, I don't see you that way. It was not your choice. It was not your fault. There were choices that I did make, but I was also such a different person during that time too. And that doesn't mean that what I did was okay. It doesn't justify it. But I just was not the same person now that I am now. And thankfully God just redeemed that. And, thankfully our marriage has been so far from what that abuse was. And that has not even played a factor into our marriage and intimacy, which I thank God for all the time as well, because I know that's not the story for so many. And it makes me so sad for those people. Because I can't even imagine, honest, like I can imagine why it must would be difficult, but I truly can't say that I could imagine what that feeling must feel like. And, I'm so grateful that God has redeemed that. And again, like it would not have been without God, through all of it. And through the confusion, through the guilt, through the shame, through the anger, there's been so much restoration. And even in those years and at that time seemed like such a big feeling, big emotion, and big part of my life. Now I just don't feel it the way I used to. And if I do feel it, it doesn't last as long as it once did. And I don't get to a point of, suicidal thoughts anymore. I'm not depressed. I have depressed moments and I have really sad moments, but I'm not living in a depressed state of mind because God is just I can't be depressed when I know what God has done. And even when we have our Austin and I, in our marriage and just in life have our hard moments now, I relate everything back to what I went through and I'm like, this is easy compared to that. So I will take these hard moments now over that any day. And I think it's truly it's a mindset shift and it's a heart shift. And it's just recognizing that, yeah, you're gonna go through hard moments and our hard moments aren't done. I mean, we've been trying for a baby for the past, actually 3 years today. 3 years today, and I've had recurrent miscarriages. And, it's like our pain is not done, but we're able to get through the pain because we know where we're going at the end of it. And we know that this pain is so temporary. And even looking back at those 16 years that I was being abused, 16 years compared to 80 is such a small portion of life. And why would I want to stay in that 16-year-old or that 16-year like heartbreak and guilt and shame when I have 80, hopefully 80 years after that, that could be filled with so much joy and happiness and great times and great memories that aren't tied to that. Like I'm not going to change and, change my path and change my direction and, change my attitude towards God or stop being grateful for God because of those years when truly I can thank God now to some degree for those years because it made me who I am today, faith, in my faith and in my spiritual walk. So yeah, I mean, God has just been good.
I feel like you just mic dropped it right there. I mean, that was like so powerful to walk us through all of that. And I'll never forget a few years ago when we were voice mailing back and forth. And I remember you being at such it was one day you were really discouraged because the trial kept getting pushed back and back and back. And it was like years of like it continuing to just keep getting pushed. And, you had a whole community of women that were praying for you and praying for things to just move through. And I'll just never forget that season, where we would voice them all the time and you would kind of share where things were at. And I remember you asked me one day, like, I just feel like giving up. Like, I just feel like giving up. Like, what's the point? Like, it just keeps getting pushed back. No one's taking it, like, they're not taking it seriously. Like, and I will just never forget after we had talked and we had been voicing back and forth, you were like, no, I need to keep doing this. There's a reason that the Lord has, like, I have been brought through this, and there's a reason why I'm not supposed to give up on continuing to seek justice for all of these victims, including myself, that have gone through this kind of abuse, not just from your stepdad, but from, this is a move to acknowledge all of the victims that have came forward and haven't been listened to and haven't been heard. And I remember telling you in that moment when I was encouraging you to press on, I remember telling you, but even if, right, like even if at the end of this, right, it doesn't go in the favor that you hope that it goes, you know and can rest in the fact that Jesus sees you, he hears you, he loves you, he's redeemed you, and you can rest knowing that God has closed that door for you. And I'm just so proud of you. I'm so proud of you that even when you had those moments where you could have totally bailed and given up on fighting here on earth for that kind of justice, that you said, nope, I'm going to keep pushing through. And you're still walking out such a journey with it and still walking out your healing and still walking out so many things. And yet you stand firm in your faith, which is so encouraging. And I feel like you answered my last question, which was going to be like, what advice would you give to other women who have been struggling, silently with this, in their life, or, whether it's child sexual abuse or it's sexual abuse of any kind or abuse of any kind? Like, what advice would you give, really to other women that are suffering alone right now? What would you say, to those women?
I would say first off, it's probably cliche, but you're truly not alone. And it's unfortunately one of those things that so many people and so many men and women have experienced. And I would not have guessed that so many have experienced what I'd experienced had I not started sharing. The first time one of my reels went viral and completely blew up, it blew my mind because all of a sudden I started getting all these messages from all of these people who have had very similar stories, and I thought my story was crazy and it was so out there, and yet I have these people that either have very similar stories or even crazier stories. And you're truly not alone. I mean, I understand how it can feel so isolating. I understand how it can feel so shameful because it's your body and it's something that God intended to be pure and to be taken care of, and your body is a temple, and God wanted your body to just be, God wants your body to be his, right? And now all of a sudden you have people that are trying to take it as theirs, and it's just not. And it can just make you feel such a negative way about yourself. But I it it has brought me, so when I first started talking and sharing what I had gone through, just telling one person changed everything for me because no longer was my story hidden. No longer was what I had went through being kept a secret, because when something is kept a secret, the devil can use it. when it's brought into the light, the devil can't use it anymore because now he doesn't have something to be like, here, let me try to use this. And, you're trying to keep this under the covers and you're trying to hide it. And, because it's bad or, whatever. And now I'm going to use it. Now I'm going to make it even worse. Now I'm going to, make you even worse through it. And I'm going to ruin your mentality and I'm going to ruin your heart and try to ruin your heart through it. But when something is spoken out, even if maybe you don't have someone close to that you can tell, because I understand that, especially if you're in extremely narcissistic, controlling, abusive situations, you may not have anyone. And that breaks my heart for you. And I'm so sorry that that is the case for you. And it's awful and it's not okay. It's not fair. It's you didn't deserve it and it's not your fault. And it's not in your control. Even speaking it out loud even if you want to write it down, if you don't want to speak it out loud, maybe you're scared someone's going to hear you, either speak it out loud in a prayer, speak it out loud and tell it to Jesus. And guess what? You don't even have to say it in a prayer form, because you speaking out loud and just starting out with God, he's hearing you automatically, and Jesus is going to speak on your behalf to God. He's going to advocate for you. Just speak it out loud or write it down if you are safe enough in a situation where you are safe enough to be able to write it down, put it in an envelope, seal it, and then burn it. I can't tell you how many times I did that. And it was so healing because it was like lighting fire to the darkness, literally putting light on the darkness. I mean, it is such a healing thing to do. And especially when you're angry, like being able to light something on fire, hopefully this is not going to get me arrested, but being able to light something on fire is truly like awesome. And it makes you feel so powerful. And you get to fight the darkness with fire. I mean, what's better than that? And the devil hates it. The devil absolutely hates it. But you are going to feel like, even maybe not a full weight off your shoulders, because because again, like, especially if you're still in the situation, you writing it down and then burning it, like, and then you're going back to it. Like it's such a complicated and hard situation. But even just writing it down, it's going to slowly, slowly start to lift that weight off your shoulders, because it's not yours to carry. It is not your burden to carry. Jesus and God wants it from you. They want to hold it for you, but you have to slowly start to give it to him, because if you don't, it's going to crush you and it's going to break you. And none of us want that. No one wants you to be broken. God needs you here. God needs you standing. God needs you standing tall, because you have a story to tell, even if it's to one person, because you don't know how it's going to change that one person's life. And the community that I've had around me to be able to comfortably share my story and share that part of my life with, I mean, it's been so transformative and restoring for me, because now I can share about it, and it's not breaking me. It's not bringing me to tears. And, it's not something that's crippling me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was nervous at the beginning of this because I don't talk about it like I used to, because it's not a part of my life like it was. I'm so disassociated from it now that it's so separate from my life. But just speaking it out loud and just starting to share about it, it's going to bring you even the tiniest bit of relief, even if it just lasts for a moment. So find a person that you can share it with. If you don't have a person, write it down, put it in an envelope, burn it, do what you have to do to release some of that from your body, because the more you start to do that, the more powerful you're going to start to feel, and the more the Holy Spirit is going to have the opportunity to truly do a work in you, to where hopefully one day you have the strength and you have the resources and the ability to be able to leave that situation. I left when I was 18, so I didn't have anything. I didn't have money. I didn't have a phone. I left my phone at home. And I found a way to leave, and I totally commit that to the Holy Spirit, because there was no other way. But when there's a will, there's a way, and you have so much fight left in you. So you just have to keep fighting and just keep pressing on, because your life is worth it and your story has purpose, and it's not without purpose. Because your story could change even just one person's life, and that's enough.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to close this, but I will say, you and Amanda, who I interviewed on our last podcast, you guys said the same exact thing about your secret, is that once you finally exposed it to the light, that is when the burdens started to fall. That is when the Holy Spirit and the Lord finally were able to enter in to start helping you heal. And I feel like the verse that needs to be the verse of this season of the podcast is Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8 through 11, which says, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, and find out what pleases the Lord." And then it goes on to say, "It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible." So it's like the Lord has shown us over and over again that when we keep those things hidden, that's when the enemy gets to torment us and does do his
Yep.
best work, where he gets to lie, he gets to hurt you. And just like Rissa said, that's an amazing action step. And it had me thinking in the Old Testament, how many times the Israelites like went into overtake different lands and different people groups. And every time they would like leave one of the cities, they would like burn it, like always as like a symbol of like God said that we were taking this land, we were taking the city, we are God's people. And like that's a lot of the Old Testament is like you see Sodom and Gomorrah and like all of these other cities, right? That like literally were burned to the ground. And so I
Yep.
love that you gave that analogy of fire, because that is powerful right there. There's so much significance of that in the word. And so I want to close with sharing with people listening how they can connect with you, so that if there's anyone that wants to intimately like connect with you, reach out to you, say thank you, or maybe they're struggling and they want to just like connect with you for prayer or support or encouragement. I figured your Instagram probably is the best way for them to reach you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yes. So my Instagram is just at Rissa Dayen, so my name. I'm gonna be, I've been a little inactive for the past few months just with the end of the trial for the most part coming, happening and having to testify and going through all of that. But slowly I'm feeling like myself again. So I'm slowly starting to post more and put more out there. I don't share as much of my story on there as much as I used to because I shared so much of it before. So you're more than welcome to go back if there's the more details that I share on there. But so my story is on there, but I also share so much about work because I'm a teacher and do all of that stuff. So definitely sharing on there. And then I'm starting to dabble into TikTok, but I'll be honest, TikTok confuses me compared to Instagram. So I'm trying, but working on it. And I'm Rissa Dayan on both. So that's how you can find me.
Perfect. And I'll drop the link for all of our listeners to your Instagram in the show notes below, so you guys can just click it and go follow her on Instagram, go connect with her. Rissa, I just want to say thank you so much for being on, open, vulnerable, sharing just like what God has taken you through. I know that this is going to be such a big encouragement for people in all different kinds of life, and even people they're thinking of that they want to share this with. So thank you for being obedient to the Lord and using your testimony for him, because he's going to help people be set free, saved, and delivered through them even hearing you speak his truth of what he's done in your life. So thank you so much for being on. And I just want to encourage everybody to subscribe, stay connected to the podcast, because we're going to have new interviews that we're dropping every other Monday moving forward. And it's all going to be powerful transformation stories of women like Rissa and Amanda, who you've heard from so far. And men are coming, couples are coming. There's going to be a lot more testimonies in the future. So make sure that you're following, you're subscribed, and you've got your notifications on for when podcasts drop. So Rissa, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, and I'm so grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much for having me. And this is actually my very first podcast. So this was so exciting. So I'm happy to finally have this done and, bucket checked off my bucket list. So thank you so much. And I'm excited to hear everyone else's testimonies. I think that this is going to be a really, really necessary space that you and Hunter are entering into. So I'm very excited. I listened to your podcast even before, but now I'm going to continue listening to it. So I'm glad you guys are back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And thank you to all of our listeners today. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks for the next episode. All right. Bye, everyone.